We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. One of the best shows of the week is always to break down some matchups. But the good news is not alone. Of course, our weekly guest, Rich Hribar, author of the worksheet at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Rich, how was your week 6, my man?
It was just kind of mediocre, man. We talked about it. I mean, listen, I was one of the people that, call me a donkey, but I was coming under on Derrick Henry.
Every time. Literally every time.
So, hey, it worked out. When he played the Jaguars, it worked out great. And when he played the Texans, not so much.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I literally, I'm sure if anyone's watched any of my videos earlier this week, literally a 1v1 away from the nuts, basically, with a Kirk Cousins triple stack. Yeah, so not great. Peter Jennings.
Justin Jefferson, man, and
yeah. I can't even talk about it, man. Forward thinking show here. So week 7, I think that one thing that stands out, obviously anyone that's opened the slate yet, this first game, actually, hang on. Let's take a step back for a second. We're going to do things a little bit differently today because there's normally some specific players we're looking at and specific matchups. So we'll get to that. But this week, there's like 4 really solid games overall. So we're going to try and touch on as much as we can in some of these games that are really popular. So the first one, again, if you were to just open up this slate for the first time, the one that stands out right away, Seattle and Arizona. So Reebs, what was your first instinct when you saw this? Is it just literally onslaught this entire game, see how much we can get in it? Seattle's a little expensive. Obviously, both the quarterbacks are expensive in this one. So what are your thoughts overall in Seattle, Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's played a lot of fun games for us this season, so they've been a team that we have regularly kind of opened up the schedule and seen who they played. And, you've got another team that, is fun sometimes, in Arizona. Sometimes they kind of don't get there for us and do some weird things offensively. But when you look at this team, we've got 2 teams that are great at just getting in the paint. Seattle has scored on 89% of their red zone opportunities, and Arizona 80%. They're first and second in the league. Seattle has scored a touchdown, 11.5 touchdowns per field goal in the NFL. That's by far the highest rate in the league. The next closest team is just at 3.6 touchdowns to field goal. They're just like, not only is Seattle just scoring points, they're scoring touchdowns for us, which is what we love in fantasy as well. And when you look at this game too, it's just got this great deep ball dynamic. So Arizona leads the league in defending the deep ball. They're number 1 in the NFL in defending passes 15 yards or further downfield. And no quarterback has been better throwing the deep ball than Russell Wilson. He leads the NFL with 8 touchdown passes on those throws. But inversely, Seattle is horrendous in defending the deep ball. They're 30th in allowing defending those passes. But Kyler Murray, inversely, is not good, despite the touchdown he threw to Christian Kirk on Monday night. He has completed just 30.6% of his throws 15 yards or further downfield. That's 29th in the NFL. So we got a game here where, it's kind of where the Arizona Cardinals should attack. Seattle has not been to the strength of their offense, but hopefully we get some of those, long touchdowns. But we said we're going to do things a little different here and just talk about these matchups. I don't want to just go runaway train like I usually do.
I love it, man. So people love when you go runaway train, man. It makes my job easy. I get to sit here and get produced, and you give us the goods, man. That's what we want.
But just look at each quarterbacks here. We'll talk about the quarterbacks first, and I'll let you kind of steer where you want to take it. But sure. Russell said he's at 20 fantasy points in every game. He still leads the league in touchdown passes, even though he's had a bye week. Arizona has kind of been, like I said, they've been good against the deep ball and mid-pack overall against quarterbacks, but when you run the gambit of who they've played, Jimmy Garoppolo, Dwayne Haskins, Matthew Stafford, Teddy Bridgewater, Joe Flacco, Andy Dalton on Monday, and then Teddy, Stafford, and Garoppolo all had 17 or more passing points against them. It's hard to really say, like, oh, yeah, we're going to move away from Russ because Arizona's 14th against the pass or something like that. We're not going to do anything like that. And then Murray has been a top 10 scorer in every week. Even last week, he completed just 9 to 24 passes on Monday night and is still getting there. He's 17th in the position in passing points per game at just 14.6. But he's second in rushing points per game, and they're designed runs too. It's not just him scrambling. And Kyler's kind of fun to watch because it's not like Lamar on these designed runs where you're like, Lamar has like the gift, Kyler is like, a little jitterbug out there.
Yeah.
No, he does like that
it's
high
like a small
step,
child
high
running
step
around
move.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something different. So, I mean, both these quarterbacks and getting these quarterbacks right is going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, when we look at Arizona's side, it's easier to trust Kyler just because we don't ever want to trust Kenyon Drake, even though he got there on Monday. So, whereas we could say Carson could score a couple, Drake to get in the box needs like a bunny, even though he got that freebie against the Cowboys on Monday night. So, I mean, getting these quarterbacks right is going to be like the first step.
Yeah. Man, of course Kenyon Drake gets there and not on the main slate, right? Like that always happens. Literally every year you wait, and then it finally happens. It's on the main slate. Circling back to the quarterbacks really quick, I want your take on something that kind of was trending a little bit on Twitter earlier today. So we talk about some of these rushing quarterbacks against man coverage and zone coverage. Like I guess the film people will tell you that this is very obvious, but man coverage is typically going to benefit running quarterbacks. So Kyler Murray, kind of his career coverage splits against man and against zone: 6.1 yards per attempt man, 8.2 yards per attempt against zone. So in theory, this could be a great spot through the air against Kyler, but only the Panthers have played more zone coverage than the Seahawks this season. So that much we know. But the other side of it is, does that limit his rushing ability in this one? And then I'm looking deeper at this matchup. Arizona actually plays the most man coverage and like third most in the league, 49.6% per Sports Info Solution. So maybe this is like a blow up spot for Russ, and everyone's just fallen in love with Kyler at a cheaper price. So any thoughts on the man coverage versus zone coverage thing? I'm kind of digging deeper into this, and I kind of like it.
Yeah, that's interesting because Kyler objectively struggled against the Panthers from a passing stance as well. True. So I mean, they're dynamic, but he's been like that all season. Outside of that Jets game, he's really kind of, he really hasn't popped, from a passing stance. We're still waiting for that moment. Obviously, Seattle has been giving away points to everybody through the air, so everyone's going to be drawn to him. And he probably comes with a little more rushing equity than Russ does at this point. We've seen Russ, he still uses his legs a little bit, but nothing like early in his career, since he's, gone post 30. So, people might look at playing Kyler and saying, well, I've got more rushing equity and the passing upside, so I'm going to go there. But yeah, we might get some man coverage love, for the Seattle wideouts. They're definitely guys that we always love to play. DK has gone over 92 receiving yards at every game. And if you go back to last year, I mean, he scored a touchdown in 7 of his past 10 games played. I mean, we love guys like that. I mean, for the whole start of the season, like FanDuel was not like bumping DK Metcalf up and not realizing what they had him. But when you look at Arizona, they did give up a good game to Kenny Galladay, who's probably the closest like archetype they've played to DK Metcalf. Yep. But if you look at the receivers that are hitting against Arizona, it's all these guys that operate near the line of scrimmage or in the middle of the field. You look at Terry McLaurin, 7 for 125, Jamison Crowder, 8 for 116, Robbie Anderson, 8 for 99, Amari Cooper on Monday, 7 for 79, CeeDee Lamb had 7 catches. So maybe this is a week that we see Tyler Lockett kind of come back to life. I mean, he had 8 or more targets the first 3 weeks of the season and then kind of just ghosted the final 2 games. And we've done this with Tyler Lockett before. He's always been a guy that's typically, had to survive on low passing volume, and his targets kind of come in spikes. So maybe this is a week coming out of the bye, they get him going again. When you look at the archetype of receiver and where receivers have beat Arizona so far this season, maybe it's a week to get back on Tyler Lockett. Now, he's definitely not cheap. And the other side, it's just really easy. You look at where Seattle's vulnerable. X receivers have just destroyed them all season. So DeAndre Hopkins locked right in, against a team that's 31st in the NFL in points allowed per game to wide receiver ones. Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Devontae Parker, Julio Jones. Edelman got him too. He's not a typical X receiver. He works in the slot. But all of those guys had 9 or more catches and double-digit targets against them. Obviously, it's a pay up for Hopkins if you want a pay up spot. But then Christian Kirk's kind of come to life here, a little bit. He's had double-digit PPR points the past 3 games he's played. The targets still are a little bit of elusive. He's had a 16% of team targets in 4 of his 5 games so far this season. He's had more than 3 receptions in just 1 game. He got there on Monday on the big play. But he is coming to life a little bit. And then, we can't really discount, too, as a deeper play, Andy Isabella. You look at, they just haven't hit on these targets, but he's getting a couple deep shots a game. And we go back to the Detroit game, he got those 2 end zone looks. He could be another sneaky guy, too, that gets through in the full, if you're making a block of this game instead of, just trying to stack a couple pieces. If you're in a full game block, Isabella, I think, is an interesting guy.
Yeah, that's the struggle with like stacking this game overall, is that the weapons are so expensive, and it's still kind of hard to get used to seeing DK Metcalf more expensive than Tyler Lockett, but I guess it's something that we're going to have to kind of get used to. I do love the Kirk call. Just looking at some of that man coverage versus zone coverage stuff. Christian Kirk leads the team with 14 targets versus zone over the last 3 weeks, so that's interesting. But we did spend a decent amount of time on, probably the best game on the slate, which is totally fine, obviously, but Detroit Atlanta. I know there's a lot of people out there that were probably very happy with their Atlanta stacks last week and not so happy with their Detroit stacks last week. So what do you think about this game overall?
Yeah, last week I ran Matt Ryan back a lot with Ridley too, with Justin Jefferson, and
Nice.
I just did not play enough Julio though.
Sure.
I just did not know what was going to happen, so I just did not have enough exposure to him in those game stacks. And typically, when I ran that game back too, when I ran the Atlanta passing side back, I ran it back with Madison, and we know how that ended.
Right there with you, brother.
Yeah. When you look at Matt Ryan now, and people say, well, when he's played Julio Jones, he's been, the QB 8 or higher. And then also, if you just look at his matchups too, he's been Julio Jones, having Julio Jones on the field, and the matchups. His QB1 games so far this season have come against the Seahawks, the Cowboys, and the Vikings. 3 teams we've steadily circled, so far this season. Detroit's allowed multiple touchdown passes to everybody on the season. They just haven't given up a ton of quarterback points, though, in totality, because teams have just run all over them. So they don't, they've only faced 34 pass attempts per game. That's the 11th fewest in the NFL. But, is Atlanta going to be a team that's going to line up and run the football successfully on a team? We're probably not going to say so, right? Like, we're probably not going to say that. So it's another good spot for Matt Ryan. We know what we got with their 2 receivers, in Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones, where the targets are going to go. So, I mean, we know that those guys are all in play. But I'm curious about the Detroit side, because we didn't get there last week, but I think it made sense. We talked about that game potentially not getting there because, 1, the Jacksonville side not doing their part, and then 2, the Jacksonville run D so far. So, I mean, you look at Atlanta, they are horrible against the pass, but the one thing they've actually consistently done well all season long is defend the run. They're 3rd in rushing defense expected points added. So they might have to, it's not going to be a spotlight like last week where they can just line up and get 3 rushing touchdowns and give the running backs 30 carries. Where they're vulnerable is in the pass and forcing teams to pass, and they've been more pass funnel. And we've seen Madison not get there on the ground either. Even when he got game scripted out, he did nothing with his carries regardless. So this might be a week where people look to say, like, well, Stafford busted out for us last week, but there's a reason to go back to him this week because of that, inverse kind of, pass funnelage that the Atlanta defense has kind of forced so far this season. And then, they have allowed a league high 29 completions of 20 or more yards on the season, which obviously goes back to Kenny Galladay. We can go back to him. I think a lot of people are going to look at TJ Hawkinson just because Atlanta was the tight end flow chart to start the season. But if you look at Hawkinson, he needs more value. I don't think he's a great cash game play. He's probably more of a tournament play. He's 16th among all tight ends receptions, 20th in targets at the position. But he gets in the box. That's why we love him. He's had just 26 yards the past 2 games combined. But he's a touchdown magnet, not a high yardage guy. But I think people will look to him too as well. And then people will probably look to see how they handle this DeAndre Swift usage coming out of the bye. He had a season high 14 rushing attempts after having 12 carries the entire season to start the year. But we talked about that Atlanta run defense might be kind of a trap. But inversely, Atlanta's allowed the most receiving points to running backs so far this season. Yep. So you might get some backwards thinking actually gets you there on Swift. You might say, oh, well, he got, the rushing usage. We want to go back. It's happening for him. But, the rushing isn't where we want to tackle, and it's receiving, but it's going to lead right back to him because he has the receiving role in the offense as well, too. So he can get there as well, too. I mean, Atlanta, they've only allowed 3.7 yards per carry to running backs. They're allowing just 8.8 rushing points per game. But like I said, 17.1 PPR receiving points out of the backfield. And Adrian Peterson's not going to get any of those.
Yeah, both sides of this matchup are decent for running backs in the passing game. The one thing that I like about this overall, Reebs, is that there's just so much recency bias. Anyone that played Detroit last week, that it failed, so they don't understand this matchup is so different. Like, Atlanta is going to fight back on the other side, and that's just such a huge part of it. So I love the idea of going back to Galladay, especially if people are down on them. Another team that people could potentially be down on, and we'll touch on this game as we finish up here, Reebs, Green Bay and Houston. So I think that Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he said it in the post-game conference that this team kind of needed to be knocked down a few pegs in some ways. So I think there's a chance that Green Bay comes out and plays really well against Houston in this spot. I mean, I guess just start guys against Houston at this point. That's kind of what we've been doing the last few weeks with some success. So let's finish up your segment today, Reebs, and let's talk about this Green Bay Houston game a little bit.
Yeah, this game has a lot of potential too, especially for big plays. I mean, in terms of plays of 20 plus yards, Green Bay is second and Houston is third in plays per game that get big yardage. Splash plays. We love splash plays and we love touchdowns at DFS. That's what we're here for. And what Rodgers doesn't have to worry about in this matchup, and he kind of crept in. Remember last year he was like his only big games came in obvious spots, and now the Bucs game kind of like throws that cloud in your mind. It's like, well, that was his first tough matchup and he flamed. But Houston, completely horrible. 29th in passing points allowed per game. And what's better is they are 28th in pressure rate Rodgers isn't going to have any of that heat that was coming on him last game. So, I mean, he's going to, the thing about the Packers is that in the passing game, there's only one way to really get there, unless you want to go up like Bob Tonyan. It's just simply Devontae Adams and then playing Aaron Jones. I was going to pick your brain. Do you think this is an inverse Aaron Jones spot? Do you remember in week 2, everyone was on the Packers passing game and the direct leverage was Aaron Jones? Is the leverage going to be this week the Packers passing game over Aaron Jones? It's such an obvious spot for Aaron Jones. Obviously, everyone played Derrick Henry crushed. They're allowing 6.5 yards per carry on first down rushing attempts. Like the most obvious rushing down, they're allowing almost 7 yards per carry. They've allowed 31 carries of 10 or more yards. That's by far the most in the league. They've allowed 605 rushing yards on carries, 10 or more yards. The next closest team, the Bengals, at 455. So almost 200 full yards allowed on explosive runs. And then Aaron Jones, he scored a touchdown in 7 consecutive games played going back last year. And he scored a touchdown in 10 of 11 games going back last year. He's obviously going to be the greatest like running back play, the greatest spot that you could imagine, this week. So I wonder, is the pivot to the passing game, or is it just a game where we just have to just say, hey, we're going to eat it with Aaron Jones, all the ownership, and maybe you just to get over, you just have to go full Aaron Jones.
Yeah, everyone wants to like recapture this Aaron Jones game that happened earlier in the year. So I think that, yes, he's a great play, obviously a great matchup, all of those things. I mean, I do truly think that there is another like 2 to 3 touchdown game coming for Aaron Jones. I'm hoping it's not this week if he ends up being super chalky and end up going that other direction. One more thing that I'll mention in terms of the passing game, Reebs, you mentioned that on the other side, there's not going to be a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers, but also the Packers defense generated the league's lowest pressure rate this year, only 23%. And Watson, his accuracy has actually jumped from 60% on target to 85% when he's not under pressure from a clean pocket. That's another Sports Info Solution stat. So there could be some nice passing options on both sides of this game. I always like when that sets up where I don't think there's going to be a ton of pressure, because I think that could just be really good for scoring overall, back and forth affair. We've seen these games against Houston just go nuclear at times. So I'm in on that. Reebs, let the people know where they can find you throughout the week and what else you have going on outside of the Joe Holka Show, brother.
Yeah, the weekly worksheet kind of break down every player and every game with all kinds of fun nuggets, hundreds of stats, even something if you're just watching the game with your dad, you can say something, make yourself look cool. If you're at there, or if you're drinking beers with your buddies, you can check that out. I do some DFS content throughout the week. I do a podcast called the Pre-Stat Motion Podcast with Chad Scott. I do a podcast called Sharp Angles, which is more of a betting and real football breakdown show with Cleve TA and Dan Pizzuta. And as always, you can find me 3:15 every Wednesday here on Joe Holka Show.
Awesome, man. Everyone make sure they follow Reebs at LordReebs on Twitter. Have a great week, man. We're working through this thing. It's already week 7, which feels crazy, but I'll see you very soon, man. Have a good one.
Absolutely.
See ya.